Welcome back to Cozy Side Audio. Tonight's story is soft, slow, and written from the heart. Perfect for those quiet hours. If it touches you, please like, share it with someone special, and subscribe for more gentle moments. Let's begin the story. Cozy Side Audio presents The Echoes in the Static. Episode 1, Static in the Air. The storm rolled in without warning. One moment the summer evening was damp and heavy, filled with the steady buzz of cicadas and the smell of asphalt after a half-hearted drizzle. The next, the sky had opened in a furious cascade of lightning, jagged white bolts tearing across the clouds like someone had cracked glass across the heavens. Mizukane Town rarely saw weather like this. Storms usually rolled over the mountains, passing by with nothing more than distant rumbles. But tonight the thunder wasn't distant. It was crawling right over their rooftops, rattling windows and making the air itself feel like it could break. Inside a cramped living room, the five of them gathered, half out of boredom, half out of ritual. They had spent countless nights like this since childhood, playing games, sharing snacks, sometimes just sitting in silence. But the storm had given the night a strange tension, like the atmosphere had become charged in ways none of them could quite name. The gathering. "Did the power flicker again?" Saya asked, pulling her knees closer to her chest on the worn-out sofa. The faint glow of her phone screen was the only steady light in the room, and it cast her face in a bluish pallor. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, though it slipped out again almost immediately. Rikuya gave a low grunt from the floor, where he was fiddling with a tangle of wires and an old portable radio. His sharp profile was lit only when lightning cracked through the window, the shadows emphasizing the permanent, tired look in his eyes. "Yeah, grid's unstable when the storm's this close. Just be glad it hasn't blown the whole block yet." "You say that like you'd enjoy it," Akihiro muttered from the armchair, arms crossed. He was the only one leaning back, trying to appear relaxed. His posture screamed older brother smugness, but his eyes kept darting to the window whenever thunder rolled too close. "I would enjoy it," Rikuya said flatly, though the corner of his mouth twitched upward. "Means I can finally test this thing." "This thing?" Tsubame's voice was so soft it nearly vanished under the storm. She sat on the rug near Saya, her legs folded neatly beneath her, hands twisting nervously at the hem of her skirt. Rikuya held up the battered radio, wires sticking out like veins. "Scavenged the circuits, patched in an old tuner. It's supposed to pick up ultra-low frequencies, but I don't think it's worked since I built it. Maybe the storm will give me a boost." "You mean you broke it?" Saya teased, though her voice was tight. Her cheerful tone tonight was effortful, Nyoka thought. Forced, like she wanted to fill the silence before it became too heavy. Nyoka herself hadn't said a word in a while. She sat closest to the television, an outdated, boxy thing that hadn't been turned on in years. Its reflective screen showed faint silhouettes of the group, the storm's flashes painting ghostly shapes across their faces. She found herself staring at those reflections, waiting for them to move in ways that didn't match. "Are we really doing this?" she murmured finally. Her voice was quieter than she intended, but the others heard it. "Doing what?" Akihiro asked. "Messing with whatever you think you're picking up." She hugged her sketchbook tighter to her chest, though she hadn't drawn in it all evening. Storms like this, they feel wrong, like the air's listening. That earned her a curious look from Tsubame, who nodded almost imperceptibly. But Rikuya only snorted. "Nyoka, the air doesn't listen. It carries sound. That's what this does. Sound, frequencies, maybe some interference if we're lucky." "Yeah, interference," Akihiro added. "Static, squealing, boring stuff, no ghosts." The word ghosts hung in the room like smoke. A sudden crack of thunder rattled the entire house. The lights flickered, dimmed, and then darkness. Only the hiss of the storm and the faint whine of the old radio filled the silence. "Great," Saya said after a beat. "Now we really are in a horror movie." Rikuya grinned in the dark, the kind of grin nobody could see but everyone could feel. Perfect timing. The first voice. He twisted the dial. Static roared to life, loud enough to make them all flinch. It wasn't ordinary static, though. It pulsed, like breathing. Nyoka felt her skin crawl immediately. Something in that sound wasn't random. It carried a pattern, faint but undeniable, like whispers hidden just beneath the noise. She leaned closer, against her better judgment. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Saya tilted her head. "It's just fuzz." "No, listen." Nyoka's heart hammered. The static wasn't just sound, it was words, distorted and distant, as though spoken from the bottom of a well. "Help?" The group froze. "Help me?" This time everyone heard it, clear, distinct, a voice within the static. "Holy shit," Akihiro breathed. He leaned forward despite himself, eyes wide. That's impossible." "It's not impossible," Rikuya said, though his voice was far shakier than usual. He twisted the dial, searching. "It's interference. Someone's radio band, crosstalk, a transmission bouncing off the storm, that's all." But the words that emerged next sent ice down all their spines. "Rikuya." The sound of his own name whispered from the static. His hand froze on the dial. Everyone turned to look at him. "That's," Saya stammered, "that's not... Rikuya, don't..." The voice broke apart into static again, like a record skipping. Then another phrase pushed through, deeper, stretched and distorted until it sounded inhuman. "It's coming." The radio crackled violently, then shut off with a snap, as if the storm itself had killed it. For a long moment no one spoke. Only the thunder answered. Finally, Tsubame whispered the question they were all thinking. "What's coming?" Tension builds. The lights came back on suddenly, flooding the room with yellow warmth that felt too ordinary after what they had just heard. For a moment, the group stared at each other, the spell almost broken. Almost. Akihiro was the first to move. He stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, fun's over. Rikuya's toy picked up something weird, sure, but it's not whatever you think it is." Nyoka hugged her sketchbook tighter. "It knew your name." "That doesn't mean anything." His voice cracked louder than intended. He looked away, embarrassed. "People say names on radios all the time. It's coincidence." "Did it sound like coincidence to you?" Saya asked, more sharply than usual. The silence that followed was answer enough. Rikuya pushed himself to his feet, staring down at the radio like it had betrayed him. His lips were pressed thin, but his hands trembled faintly. I'll figure it out later. Just forget it for now." But Nyoka knew she wouldn't forget. Not tonight. Not ever. The reflection. After the storm waned and the others drifted into restless conversation, Nyoka found her gaze pulled again to the black screen of the old television. Her own reflection stared back, pale and tired. But for a split second she thought she saw something behind her shoulder. A figure, blurred, watching. When she whipped her head around, no one was there. But on the glass of the TV screen, static shimmered faintly, though the television was unplugged. And beneath the low rumble of thunder outside, Nyoka thought she heard it again. That same distorted whisper. "It's coming." Episode 2, Voices of the Familiar. The storm left behind a silence that felt heavier than the thunder itself. The next morning, Mizukane town seemed washed clean. Puddles gleamed like broken mirrors in the streets. The air smelled metallic, sharp, like the storm had scorched not just the sky but the very oxygen. Even the cicadas were quieter than usual, as though the storm had stolen their voices too. Nyoka hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard it. The static, breathing like a lung, whispering her name. When dawn painted her room in pale gray light, she was still sitting up in bed with her sketchbook clutched tight against her chest, the pencil lines across the page jagged and meaningless. All she had managed to draw were shapes, loops, spirals, tangled wires that resembled veins. She'd tried to sketch the figure she thought she'd seen in the television's reflection, but the memory slipped away every time she pressed graphite to paper. She thought of Rikuya, insisting it was interference. She thought of Tsubame's wide, fearful eyes. She thought of the voice. It's coming. But what? The aftermath. At school, their group clustered in the back of the classroom just as they always did. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting their pale glow across lined notebooks and half-awake students. Teachers droned on about equations and essays, but Nyoka noticed how her friends weren't listening. Saya, usually scribbling notes with mechanical precision, only stared at the window, lips pressed together. Tsubame's hand trembled as she tried to take notes, each character trailing off into the next like the ink itself was anxious. Akihiro tapped his pencil against the desk, too fast to be boredom. And Rikuya? He just stared down at his phone, screen dark, thumb twitching like he wanted to turn it on but couldn't. When the bell rang, the others shuffled out in a blur of chatter, but the five of them lingered. "We're not going to talk about it?" Saya finally said, her voice sharp with the kind of brittle cheer she used when she was nervous. "Talk about what?" Akihiro replied, too quickly. "The voice," she snapped, then quieter. "It knew his name." Rikuya's jaw tightened. "It's not what you think. Signals get scrambled. It happens." "Signals don't warn you," Tsubame whispered. "Signals don't say things like that." Nyoka stayed quiet. She was still remembering the TV screen, the faint shimmer of static crawling across glass without power. Finally, Saya exhaled. "Okay. If it's interference, then fine. Let's test it. Let's do it again." The group went still. "Do what again?" Akihiro asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "Turn on the radio," Saya said. "The TV too, if we can. If it was random, it won't happen again. And if it wasn't, then we need to know." Experiment. That evening, they gathered once more in Nyoka's living room. The air outside was damp, though the sky was clear now. Crickets had replaced the storm's howls, but the sound felt fragile, like it could shatter at any moment. The old TV sat against the wall, blank screen reflecting their anxious faces. Rikuya set his radio down beside it, wires still frayed, like veins spilling across the carpet. "Ready?" he muttered. "Define ready," Akihiro said, but no one laughed. Rikuya flicked the switch. Static hissed out, sharp and thin this time, like sandpaper dragged across glass. He twisted the dial. Nothing but white noise. For a long moment it seemed like the storm had indeed been a fluke. Then, Saya. Her name. The voice was fragile, broken, but unmistakable. Saya's breath caught. She stumbled forward, dropping to her knees in front of the radio. "Mom?" she whispered. No one spoke. No one even breathed. "Saya, it's me." Her hands trembled as she touched the edge of the radio as though it were a holy relic. "Mom, oh my God, how? How is this? I miss you." Tears spilled down Saya's cheeks. Her voice cracked into a sob. "I miss you too. The voice broke off into static like someone had pulled a plug. Saya clutched at the device, shaking it, desperate. "No, don't go, please." But only static answered. The cracks in reality. The silence that followed was unbearable. Finally, Akihiro broke it, his voice harsh. "It's a trick. It has to be." "That was my mom," Saya hissed, turning on him with raw fury. "Don't you dare! Don't you dare!" "It sounded like her," Nyoka admitted softly. "But," she hesitated. The way the storm voice sounded like Rikuya's name, the same distortion. Rikuya adjusted the wires, avoiding their eyes. "It's mimicking, could be recordings, broadcasts, something in the atmosphere bouncing voices back." "Then why did it say my name?" Saya demanded. "Why hers? Why like that?" No one had an answer. Nyoka's night. Later that night, long after the others had left, Nyoka sat alone in her room. The storm had left behind a sky too clear, the stars sharp and cold above the rooftops. She tried to sketch again, but her hand moved without thought, lines twisting into shapes she didn't recognize. At first it was just spirals. Then those spirals stretched, became mouths. Open mouths, screaming into nothing. The sound of static filled her ears. She froze, pencil hovering. Her television was off, her radio was unplugged, but she still heard it. And then, Nyoka. Her grandmother's voice, soft, trembling, a voice she hadn't heard since the funeral 2 years ago. Sweet girl, you need to listen. Tears blurred her vision. Grandma? Don't trust the voices. Some are not us. Her heart froze. It's coming. The static cut off. And for the first time in years, Nyoka screamed. Episode 3. The Collector of Frequencies. The radio hadn't left Rikuya's desk in 2 days. Its black casing, scuffed and half-cracked, sat in a nest of wires and spare parts scavenged from old electronics. Rikuya's room was cluttered with the evidence of his obsession. Open circuit boards, dismantled headphones, and notebooks filled with frantic scrawls of numbers and waveforms. The smell of solder and old dust clung to the air. He hadn't been sleeping. He knew that from the shadows under his eyes, from the way his hand shook when he reached for his tools. But he couldn't stop. Because every time he turned the radio on, something answered. Not always clearly. Sometimes it was only static. Sometimes faint voices that dissolved before he could capture them. But enough of them were distinct. Enough of them said names. And once, just once, he swore he had heard his own voice. That was the moment he knew it wasn't just interference. The meeting. By the third evening, the group had gathered again. They always did, as though gravity itself pulled them back together. The storm had passed, but the sky hadn't been quite right since. Clouds too low, the moon veiled in a haze that shifted unnaturally. Nyoka sat cross-legged on the floor, sketchbook in her lap, though she hadn't drawn a line all night. Saya sat beside her, restless, bouncing her leg. Tsubame curled into herself on the couch, arms hugging her knees. Akihiro paced, chewing his lip like a caged animal. And Rikuya? He crouched by his desk, eyes fixed on the glowing red light of the radio. All right, Akihiro said finally, breaking the tense silence. Tell me why we're doing this again. Didn't we agree last time this was a bad idea? No, Saya snapped. You said it was a bad idea. The rest of us want answers. I don't want answers, Tsubame whispered, so softly they almost didn't hear her. I want it to stop. It won't stop, Nyoka murmured. Her voice surprised even herself, low and certain. The others turned to look at her. Whatever it is, it found us. It won't just go away. Then we control it, Rikuya said, his voice flat with determination. If it's a frequency, then it has rules. And if it has rules, I can break them. He turned the dial. Static roared, sharp and immediate, filling the room like a storm trapped in a box. The whisper. At first it was only noise, but then came the rhythm, soft pulses, low and high tones weaving like breath. The group leaned in without meaning to, pulled forward by something unseen. Akihiro. The name cut through like a blade. Akihiro froze mid-step. Akihiro, don't be afraid. His face went pale. That's my brother's voice. Your brother? Saya asked. Akihiro swallowed hard. Shinji. He died when I was 12. Car accident. The voice came again, clearer now, sweet with familiarity. I'm proud of you. Akihiro's breath shuddered out. He sank into the nearest chair, burying his face in his hands. I haven't heard him in years. Not like this. The others sat frozen, caught between awe and terror. But then, layered beneath Shinji's voice, came something else. A second voice. Deeper, warped, like someone dragging metal across stone. Feed me. The static warped violently, rising into a shriek before cutting off completely. The radio fell silent, shaken. Nobody moved for a long time. Finally, Saya whispered. That wasn't him at the end, right? Rakuya shook his head slowly. No, that was something else. What the hell does feed me mean? Akihiro demanded, his voice raw. He looked at the radio as though it had betrayed him. That wasn't Shinji. Shinji wouldn't. He cut himself off, fists clenching. Nyoka's gaze dropped to her sketchbook. Without realizing it, she had drawn the shape of a mouth, wide, open, endless. The dream. That night, Nyoka dreamed of static. It wasn't sound, not exactly. It was a space. She stood in a field of black and white snow, every step crunching like broken glass. The air hummed, thick with distortion. And ahead of her, a shape. Not human, not ghost. Something stretched and flickering like a figure halfway through being erased. It bent and unfolded, limbs crackling in and out of existence. And when it opened its mouth, she heard all the voices at once. Her grandmother, Saya's mother, Akihiro's brother, countless others, layered and collapsing into one another. It's coming! She woke screaming. The collector. The next day, Rakuya shoved a notebook into the center of their table at school. Pages filled with jagged waveforms and scrawled notes spilled across the desks. I've been tracking it, he said. His voice was hollow, but steady. The voices aren't random, they're clustered, like something is pulling them together. Pulling? Tsubame echoed. Collecting. Saya frowned. Collecting what? Frequencies, voices, souls, I don't know. Rakuya rubbed his eyes. But every time we listen, it gets stronger. Like we're feeding it. Nyoka remembered the dream, the mouth in the static. She said nothing. Warning. That night, Nyoka stayed away from her TV and radio. She sat by her window instead, sketchbook open, pencil trembling in her hand. The streets below were quiet. Too quiet. Like the whole town was holding its breath. Then she heard it. Not from her devices, not from anywhere specific. From the air itself. Nyoka. She froze. Don't tune deeper. Her grandmother's voice again, weak, fading. If you do, it will find you. The voice vanished. Nyoka's pencil dropped from her hand. She pressed her palms to her ears, but the silence was worse than the static. Episode 4. Residual Hauntings. Tsubame had always been a light sleeper. As a child, her parents used to tease her. Even the sound of a sparrow on the windowsill could wake her. But ever since the storm, sleep wasn't just fragile, it was dangerous. Every time she closed her eyes, the static found her. The first residue. On the third night after Akihiro's brother's voice, she woke to the sound of whispering. Her radio wasn't even plugged in, neither was the TV. Yet the noise filled her room, low and pulsing, like a crowd of people murmuring on the other side of a wall. She pressed her hands to her ears. It didn't help. The whispers came from inside her head. Help me. Let me in. Hungry. She stumbled out of bed, heart hammering, and tripped over her sketch pad. Not hers. Nyoka had given it to her last week, insisting drawing might help her calm down. But when Tsubame bent to pick it up, her stomach turned to ice. The page had been blank before. Now it was filled with black scribbles, circles and circles of ink, jagged lines cutting through them. At the center, a single word. Feed. Gathering. At school the next morning, Tsubame didn't speak at first. She only clutched her notebook against her chest, fingers trembling. The others noticed immediately. What happened? Saya pressed, leaning across the lunch table. Tsubame shook her head. Her lips parted, but the words caught like splinters in her throat. Rakuya frowned. You saw it, didn't you? Or heard it? She nodded once, eyes wide. Nyoka leaned closer, voice low. Show us. Reluctantly, Tsubame slid the sketchpad across the table. When Saya opened it, her playful bravado vanished. This isn't your drawing, Saya said softly. I was asleep, Tsubame whispered. I didn't touch it. Akihiro swore under his breath. This is getting worse. It's not just the radios anymore. Rikuya's gaze was sharp, analytical. Residual imprint, like a recording burned into her mind. It's leaking out. That's not science, Saya snapped. It's the only explanation we have, Rikuya shot back. Nyoka touched Tsubame's shoulder gently. It's okay. We'll figure it out. Together. But Tsubame wasn't sure together would save her. The hallway incident. That evening, on her way home, Tsubame walked the long back hallways of their school alone. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, some flickering, some dead. Halfway down the corridor, the air grew heavy. The static began again, not in her head this time, through the lights themselves. Every flicker pulsed with whispers. Tsubame. Don't run. Stay with us. Her breath quickened. She broke into a run. The hallway seemed to stretch longer and longer, the exit door pulling further away. She stumbled, fell, scrambled to her feet, and saw them. Shadows pressed against the glass of the classroom doors. Pale hands, too many fingers. Faces blurred, smeared like bad reception. They pounded silently, mouths opening and closing in unison. Feed. The lights above her blew out, one by one, chasing her down the hall. She burst through the exit door into the dusk, lungs burning. The whispers cut off like a severed cord. She vomited into the grass. The confession. That night, the group gathered at Nyoka's place. Tsubame hadn't wanted to come, but Saya practically dragged her. She told them everything. About the whispers, the drawing, the hallway. Silence followed. Akihiro clenched his fists. They're hunting us. They're not hunting, Rikuya corrected, flipping through his notes. They're attaching, piggybacking off us. Every time we listen, they get closer, stronger. It's like they're using us as anchors. Anchors to what? Saya demanded. To hear, Rikuya said. Nyoka swallowed. Then if we keep listening, they'll cross over, Rikuya finished. The residual manifestation. Later that night, Nyoka woke to the sound of scratching. She sat up, heart pounding. The scratching was coming from Tsubame's side of the futon. Tsubame? Tsubame sat upright, face pale in the moonlight. Her fingers moved furiously across the sketchpad, though her eyes were shut tight. She was sleep drawing. Nyoka leaned over, and her stomach dropped. On the page was a perfect replica of the hallway Tsubame had described, every detail sharp. But in the center of the drawing, something had changed. A figure, flickering, half erased, with a mouth stretched open wider than its head should allow. And from Tsubame's lips, in a voice not her own, I'm coming through. Episode 5. Fractured Signals. The group didn't meet for 3 days. That had never happened before. Since the storm, some strange rhythm had tethered them together, pulling them into the same orbit no matter what. But after Tsubame's collapse, no one had the courage to call the others. The silence between them felt alive, waiting. And in that silence, the static only grew louder. Saya's mask cracks. Saya prided herself on being the strong one. The joker. The one who could diffuse tension with a grin or a careless remark. But on the second night apart, she heard her mother's voice through her earbuds. Not the soft, fading memory that had whispered once before. No, this was her mother as she'd sounded in her final weeks, weak and trembling, the oxygen machine hissing in the background. Saya, don't leave me. Her stomach dropped. She tore the earbuds out, flinging them across the room. The music player wasn't even on. But the whisper lingered, curling in her ears like smoke. You're a bad daughter. By the time the morning sun bled through her curtains, Saya's mask of easy confidence had cracked. Akihiro's fury. Meanwhile, Akihiro tried to bury himself in basketball practice. He thought the noise of sneakers squeaking on the court, the pounding rhythm of the ball, would drown out the whispers. It didn't. Halfway through drills, his coach pulled him aside. Akihiro, what's wrong with you? You're off. Distracted. Akihiro opened his mouth to answer, and then he heard it. Shinji. The ball rolled across the court, forgotten. Akihiro turned his head sharply, eyes scanning the empty bleachers. You let me die! He staggered back, chest tightening. His brother's voice, accusatory, sharp. Shut up, Akihiro muttered under his breath. Akihiro? His coach asked, startled. Shut up! Akihiro roared, slamming his fist into the wall so hard his knuckles split. The gym fell silent, but the static didn't. The reunion. It was Rikuya who finally broke the silence. Meet me. Tonight. My place. His text was short, clipped, no explanations. They all came anyway. The air in his room was stifling, heavy with the smell of solder and burned plastic. Wires crawled across the floor like veins. On his desk sat not just one radio but 3, each one tuned to a different frequency, all hissing at once. You've been listening this whole time? Saya demanded, appalled. Rikuya didn't look up. It's the only way to understand it. It's the only way to feed it, Akihiro snapped. Do you think not listening makes it go away? Rikuya shot back. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice raw. It's already here. Ignoring it won't save us. Nyoka placed her sketchbook on the table. Its newest page showed the flickering figure again, this time surrounded by hands stretching out of the static. She spoke quietly. It's not just feeding. It's learning. From us. About us. The others fell silent. The trick. That night, as they sat in Rikuya's room, one of the radios shifted. The static thinned, reshaped itself into words. Nyoka. She stiffened. It was her grandmother's voice again. Listen to me. You must open the door. Nyoka's breath caught. Her eyes flicked to the door of Rikuya's room. If you open it, I can come back. I can protect you from the thing in the static. Tsubame whimpered. Don't. It's lying. But Nyoka's chest ached with longing. She wanted to believe it. Just open it, Nyoka. Just once. Her hand rose without her meaning to, fingers trembling as they reached for the knob. The others watched, frozen, until Akihiro lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. Don't you dare, he hissed. His grip was bruising, desperate. The radio shrieked, a burst of static so loud it rattled the windows. Then, laughter, distorted, mocking. Almost. The radios all cut to silence. Splintering. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Saya said, We can't trust anything we hear. Not anymore. Nyoka pulled her hand back, ashamed. It sounded just like her. That's the point, Rikuya muttered. His hands shook as he scribbled notes, though the pen tore jagged holes into the paper. It's using familiarity, mimicry, testing what will obey. Akihiro slammed his fist against the desk. So what? We just sit here and let it crawl closer? His anger was wildfire, and it lit something in the room. The fragile tether between them snapped. You're the one it wants most, Saya snapped. Your brother's voice is the loudest. Don't put this on me, Akihiro roared. Tsubame burst into tears. Stop, please stop. But they didn't. The shouting grew, voices crashing against one another like waves, until Nyoka covered her ears and whispered through the noise. It's making us fight. The room fell silent. And in that silence, the faint crackle of static returned. Episode 6. The Dead Channel. The silence between them didn't last long. Silence, after all, was never truly silent anymore. The static filled it, always at the edge of hearing, like a storm rolling just beyond the horizon. The dare, Rikuya was the one who said it. We need to find the dead channel. The others stared at him like he'd gone mad. Saya folded her arms. The what channel? Rikuya adjusted his glasses, though the gesture was more to hide the shake in his hand than anything else. Every spectrum has a void, a place where no station is supposed to exist. Engineers call it a dead channel, I've been tracking the frequencies we've been hearing, and they're converging. Nyoka's skin prickled. Converging where? Rikuya's gaze flicked to his notes, then back to them. His eyes were fever bright. Right in the middle of the dead channel. Akihiro scoffed. You make it sound like there's a door sitting there waiting to be opened. Rikuya didn't laugh. That night they gathered in his room again. The dial. The radios were set up in a triangle, wires snaking across the floor like vines. Rikuya hunched over the middle one, his fingers steady on the dial. This isn't smart, Saya muttered. She paced back and forth, restless. Since when has any of this been smart? Akihiro shot back. Tsubame sat curled in the corner, knees hugged to her chest, whispering a prayer under her breath. Nyoka's sketchbook lay open on the floor beside her. Tonight she hadn't drawn anything yet, but her pencil hovered, ready, as though her hand might move without her. Rikuya inhaled, exhaled, and began to turn the dial. Static rose and fell, the hiss bending into half-words and warped tones. Then, silence. Not the soft quiet of an empty channel. A silence that pressed against their ears, too thick, too sharp, like standing in a vacuum. Then came the voice. The voice. You found me. The words vibrated through the walls, through their bones. It wasn't coming from the radio alone. It was in the air, in the floor, in the cavities of their skulls. Clever children, Tsubame whimpered, covering her ears. What do you want? Rikuya demanded, his voice shaking despite his attempt at control. What I've always wanted. The static swelled, shaping itself into a sound like hundreds of mouths opening at once. To feed. The radio screamed. The bleed. The lights in Rikuya's room flickered violently, then shattered, raining glass. Shadows bent across the walls, stretching into forms that shouldn't exist. Arms too long, faces blurred like bad reception. Nyoka's pencil moved on its own, carving frantic lines across the page. When she looked down, her stomach lurched. She had drawn the room itself, the broken lights, the bent shadows. But in the corner of the drawing, behind Tsubame, a new figure flickered, half-formed, its face smeared, its mouth wide. Behind you! Nyoka screamed. Tsubame turned, and the shadow lunged. Akihiro tackled her out of the way. The figure dissolved into static, but the sound of laughter filled the room, warped and metallic. You opened the door? The radios shut off all at once. The aftermath. When the lights steadied again, the room was wrecked. Glass everywhere. Wires burned out. Tsubame sobbed into Akihiro's shirt. Saya stood stiff, her face pale, her bravado gone. Rikuya sat on the floor, stunned, staring at the dead radios. Nyoka clutched her sketchbook against her chest, her hands shaking. That wasn't just voices, she whispered. It was here, with us. No, Rikuya said hoarsely. Not fully, not yet. Not yet? Saya snapped. You mean it's going to get worse? Rikuya looked at the broken radios. We tuned the dead channel. We let it in. There's no going back. The warning. That night Nyoka dreamed again. The static field stretched out before her, endless. The flickering figure stood at its center, its mouth opening, swallowing the sky. But this time, another voice whispered in her ear, soft, familiar. Don't let it anchor. She turned and saw her grandmother, pale and flickering, her form breaking apart like bad tape. Break the signal, or it will stay. Her eyes burned with tears. How? But the dream dissolved into static before she got her answer. Episode 7. Echoes in the Walls. By now the static had claimed their nights. Every one of them had begun to dread sundown, because it meant the air itself would come alive, bending familiar spaces into something wrong. And the worst part? It followed them home. Nyoka's house. Nyoka's home had always been her sanctuary. Her grandmother's charms still hung by the doors and windows, the faint smell of incense lingering in the wood. But now, when she sat at her desk to draw, the lines on her paper moved after she set her pencil down. At first it was subtle, a curve bending sharper, a shadow lengthening. But one night she left her sketch unfinished and went to wash her hands. When she returned, the drawing had completed itself. It showed her bedroom. This bedroom, down to the smallest detail. But the Nyoka in the drawing wasn't sitting at her desk. She was lying in bed, her face turned toward the door. And in the doorway stood the flickering figure. She tore the page out, ripped it to shreds, flushed it down the toilet. But when she sat back down, the next page bore the same drawing. Saya's apartment. Saya tried to drown the static out with music, headphones blasting at full volume, songs on repeat until her ears rang. But sometimes the lyrics changed. Saya, why did you let me die? She froze. The song wasn't supposed to have words like that. She pulled the headphones off, and the voice continued. Coming from the walls, the pipes, the vents. You're weak. You'll never save them. She slammed her hands against the plaster, shouting for it to stop, but the echoes just multiplied, bouncing back in her own voice, warped and cruel. You're weak. You're weak. Akihiro's apartment. Akihiro stopped sleeping. Every time he closed his eyes, his brother's voice returned, sometimes warm and kind, sometimes hateful, sometimes silent but staring. One night he stumbled into the kitchen for water. The radio on the counter was unplugged, yet its speaker clicked on. Hey, little brother. His throat tightened. Shinji? I miss you. Tears blurred his vision. I miss you too. Let me in. The radio sparked, the smell of ozone filling the room. Akihiro staggered back, smashing the radio to the floor, but the voice didn't stop. It came from the sink drain, the refrigerator hum, the light bulb flickering overhead. Let me in. Tsubame's apartment. Tsubame's parents had grown concerned. She hadn't been eating, barely been speaking. They thought it was just stress, overwork, maybe depression. But they didn't hear the static in the walls at night. They didn't see the way her mirror sometimes reflected a room that wasn't hers, a darker, broken version, with figures crawling on the floor. One night, she woke to find herself standing in front of that mirror, her own reflection smiling back, though she wasn't. You don't need them, the reflection whispered. I'll take care of you. Tsubame screamed, waking her parents, but by the time they reached her, the reflection was gone. The gathering. The next day they met again. Each one looked worse than before. Dark circles, pale faces, nerves frayed raw. It's in our houses now, Saya said bluntly, her usual bravado stripped away. There's nowhere safe. Akihiro slammed his fist against the table. Then we fight it. With what? Tsubame cried. Nyoka placed her sketchbook on the table. The newest drawing showed all four of them sitting exactly as they were now. But in the background, the static figure loomed larger than ever, its mouth stretching wide. We don't fight it, she said softly. Not yet. We learn its rules. Rikuya nodded, though his voice was hoarse. Every haunting is an anchor. The more it echoes us, the stronger it gets. Then what? Saya demanded. We stop listening? Stop sleeping? Stop living? No one answered. The static did. A faint crackle filled the room, though no device was turned on. You're mine already. Episode 8, The Silent Interval. By now, none of them slept. The nights were no longer measured in hours, but in pulses of static, whispers, and reflections. They hadn't met as a full group in days, only communicating through short, urgent messages. Rikuya called them together one evening. His apartment, like always, smelled of solder and burnt wiring. We need a plan, he said. We can't keep letting it reach us like this. It's learning faster than we are. Every device, every reflection, every surface. It's watching, testing, feeding. Nyoka sat cross-legged on the floor, her sketchbook open but untouched. The drawings she made now were automatic, guided by some subconscious warning she could neither stop nor fully understand. We stop using everything, Tsubame said quietly, her voice trembling. Phones, TVs, Radios, computers. We disconnect. That's impossible, Akihiro said, running a hand through his hair. We need phones to meet, to survive. Better alive than dead, Saya snapped. The experiment. That night, they gathered in Rakuya's room, leaving every electronic device outside the door. The room felt strangely spacious without the wires, but the absence of static didn't bring relief. Instead, it brought something worse. The silence was dense. It pressed against their ears, their skin, their hearts. Why? Tsubame whispered. A shadow flickered across the far wall. Nothing else moved. No sound. But Nyoka's stomach twisted. The figure was not the same as before. It had no form, only an impression of motion, like a memory of a person she should recognize but couldn't. They're listening, Nyoka murmured. I can't. Tsubame's voice broke. I can't do this. Akihiro stood and shouted. Then what the hell do you call this? Doing nothing? The shadow responded, not in words, but in a ripple of the air. Their skin crawled. The room vibrated faintly. Your silence feeds me too. Personal torment. The silent interval was worse individually. Nyoka found herself staring at mirrors for hours, seeing the figure looming behind her, static crawling over its face. Saya attempted sleep in a dark apartment, only to hear her mother's voice crying, distorted, accusing. You left me. You're weak. Akihiro heard his brother's whispers inside his own skull. Why aren't you helping me? Why did you let me go? Tsubame's reflections fractured, multiple copies appearing in the empty room, whispering, Come with me. You belong here. They realized, even without technology, the entity could reach them. A fractured plan. They reconvened the next day, bleary-eyed on the floor of Nyoka's room. It's everywhere, Saya said. It doesn't need radios anymore. It doesn't need mirrors. It's in our heads. Rakuya scribbled furiously in his notebook. No. It still follows patterns. It feeds on echoes. Devices make it faster, more precise. But the silence is different. It forces it to improvise, and improvisation can be traced. Nyoka tilted her head. So, silence is a weapon? Rakuya looked up, eyes wild. It can be if we understand it, but one wrong move. He shivered. And it anchors permanently. We can't risk that. Akihiro leaned back, exhausted. We're prisoners. No devices, no sleep. What the hell kind of life is this? Tsubame shivered. Better than letting it take us. The first test. They attempted a controlled silence experiment. 1 hour in total darkness, no talking, no devices, no reflections. They sat in a circle, knees drawn up, hands clasped. The room was heavy with their own breathing. For 30 minutes nothing happened. Then, a faint scratching sound echoed from the walls. Tsubame's eyes widened. They're trying. The scratching became soft murmurs, static without sound. Shapes appeared in the corner of the room, impossible to define but unmistakably watching. They know we're afraid, Nyoka whispered. They know we're human. Rakuya's notebook shook in his lap. We've got one more test. 1 hour. Then we pull out. We need data. And for the first time, they felt the true weight of being prey. The entity didn't need to strike. It only needed to wait. Episode 9. Frequency War. The world had grown too quiet. Days without phones, nights without TVs, silence pressing against their ears until the weight of it drove them to madness. And yet, even stripped of wires and signals, the static still came. It flickered through shadows, mirrored in voices, lurked in the pauses between their words. Rakuya was the one who refused to surrender. It's a parasite, he said, shoving pages of scribbled notes across the table. It survives by attaching to resonance. Echoes, feedback, repetition. We've been feeding it every time we panic, every time we respond. But if we can disrupt that pattern, if we can scramble it, we might push it back. Or make it stronger, Saya muttered. She hadn't slept in 3 days. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her voice cracked. "Or make it stronger," Rakuya admitted. "But we're out of time. If we do nothing, it wins." Building the weapons. They scavenged old equipment from Rakuya's workshop. Broken radios and tangled wires, handheld recorders. The plan was crude but desperate. Record their own voices, then play them back on distorted loops, forcing the entity to chase false echoes. "Think of it like a decoy," Rakuya explained. "We'll make a frequency war it can't win." Nyoka sat apart, sketchbook in hand. She drew as he spoke, unable to stop. What appeared on the page wasn't the group, but their reflections. 4 shadows, each tethered by wires to a mass of static that writhed above them like a storm cloud. When she looked up, Akihiro was staring. "Is that what you see when you draw?" Nyoka closed the book. "It's what's coming." The first broadcast. They set up in the abandoned school gymnasium, away from neighbors and family. The walls still smelled of mold and chalk, but it was isolated, safe. Rakuya arranged the radios in a circle, static buzzing faintly. He nodded to Akihiro. "Say something." Akihiro leaned toward the recorder. His voice shook. "This is Akihiro. This is Akihiro. This is Akihiro." They played it back, distorted and slowed. The words bled into themselves, becoming eerie, inhuman. "This is Akihiro." The lights flickered. The static in the room deepened. "Akihiro." Something answered. "Brother." Akihiro staggered back, heart hammering. It worked. It's here. Escalation. The gymnasium groaned as though under immense weight. Shadows pooled across the walls. The voices in the loop multiplied, warping, fracturing. Saya gritted her teeth. "If it wants echoes, let's drown it." She slammed her fist against another recorder. "This is Saya, this is Saya." The loop began. Nyoka followed. "This is Nyoka, this is Nyoka." Subam hesitated, trembling. Her reflection in the gym window smiled at her, though she wasn't smiling. "Don't give it your name," the reflection whispered. But she did. "This is Subam." The entity shrieked, no longer just static, but a sound that tore through their bones. The radio sparked, the wires writhed like living things. "Counterattack!" Rakuya shouted over the noise. "It's reacting! Keep the loops going! Don't break the circle!" The entity flickered into shape at the center of the gym, a tall, warped silhouette, its mouth stretching wider than its face. Every loop of their names made it jerk and shudder, like a puppet pulled in too many directions. "Look!" Nyoka cried. "It's weakening!" For a moment, hope surged. Then the loops distorted on their own. "This is Akihiro. This is Akihiro." Twisted into, "You let me die. You let me die." "This is Saya. This is Saya." Twisted into, "You're weak. You're worthless." "This is Nyoka. This is Nyoka." Twisted into, "I'll draw your death. I'll draw your death." "This is Subama. This is Subama." Twisted into, "You belong with me. You belong with me." The entity roared, no longer weakened but towering, feeding on the fear it forced back into them. Collapse. The lights exploded. Radios burst one by one, sparks showering the floor. The gym filled with the smell of burning plastic. Rakuya yanked cables free, screaming, "Abort! Abort! Get out!" They ran into the night, the entity's laughter chasing them, if laughter could be static, sharp, and endless. On the sidewalk outside, bent over and gasping, Saya spat blood. "We can't fight it. Every time we try, it twists us back against ourselves." Akihiro punched the pavement until his knuckles bled. "Then what the hell are we supposed to do? Just keep running?" No one answered. Nyoka slowly opened her sketchbook, hands trembling. The newest drawing was already there, though she hadn't drawn it. It showed the group huddled on the sidewalk, exactly as they were now. And above them, the static figures stretched across the sky, wires sinking into the ground like roots. At the bottom of the page, in handwriting not her own, were 3 words. "You've already lost." Episode 10, The Dead Channel. The city was restless. Rumors spread quickly when strange things happened, and lately there had been plenty. Lights flickering at odd hours, radios humming despite being unplugged, shadows crossing windows of empty apartments. But the rumor that reached Rikuya chilled him most. An old TV station on the edge of town had turned itself back on. The building had been shut down years ago, left to rot with broken windows and weeds swallowing the parking lot. Yet people whispered of flickering screens inside, broadcasting a single channel, snow and static, sometimes interrupted by voices that shouldn't exist. Rikuya told the group. None of them wanted to believe it, but none of them doubted it either. "It's calling us," Nyoka said softly, fingers brushing the cover of her sketchbook. "It wants us there." The abandoned station. They went at night. The TV station rose like a corpse, its broken antennae clawing at the starless sky. Graffiti smeared the walls, glass crunched beneath their shoes, and the air smelled of rust and mildew. "Place looks like it's been dead for decades," Akihiro muttered, though his fists were clenched tight. Inside, the air was damp, thick with dust. Cables dangled from the ceiling like vines, many chewed through by rats. Old monitors lined the hallways, most shattered, but every so often one flickered faintly with static. "This way," Rikuya said, guiding them with a trembling flashlight. The deeper they went, the louder the hum became, a low vibration crawling under their skin. Finally, they reached the control room. The broadcast. Dozens of televisions stood against the walls, screens glowing white with static. None were plugged in. But the central monitor showed something different. Not just snow, an image, a room, their room. Nyoka's bedroom drawn in stark monochrome. The desk, the bed, the window. And there, sitting on the bed, was Nyoka herself, watching the screen with hollow eyes. Nyoka gasped and stumbled back. That's not me." The figure on the screen turned slowly toward the camera. Its mouth opened, too wide, the sound of static pouring out like a scream. The other monitors flickered in unison. Images spilled across them. Saya's apartment, Akihiro's kitchen, Tsubame's mirror, Rikuya's workshop. Each showed the same. Warped copies of themselves, performing mundane actions twisted into nightmares. Saya clutching her headphones, sobbing as invisible hands pulled the cord tighter around her throat. Akihiro standing over his brother's grave, shovel in hand. Tsubame smiling as her reflection reached through the glass. Rikuya burning his notebooks, laughing. Their doubles looked directly into the monitors, as if aware of being watched. "Stop it," Tsubame whispered, covering her face. "Make it stop." The voice of the channel. The central monitor crackled, a voice breaking through the static. "You gave us names. You gave us faces. You gave us your fear." The voice was not singular. It was all of theirs, layered together. "Now we are you," Akihiro snapped. "You're nothing. You're a parasite." The figure on his monitor grinned, shovel dripping with unseen soil. "Then what does that make you?" The televisions shook violently. The air filled with the smell of ozone, hair rising on their arms as though lightning were about to strike. Rikuya pulled at the wires, trying to disconnect the screens, but none of them were attached to anything. The machines were feeding on themselves. The dead channel opens. Suddenly, all the monitors shifted at once. Not apartments and not reflections, not them. A hallway, dark and narrow, lined with broken walls. The static figure stood at the far end, taller than ever, its body twitching like corrupted video. And then the hallway wasn't just on the screen, it was around them. The control room dissolved. The smell of mold and dust was replaced by scorched metal and ozone. The televisions vanished, leaving only the endless corridor stretching forward. They stumbled back against each other. "Are we inside it?" Saya gasped. "No," Nyoka whispered, her voice shaking. "It's inside us." The figure at the end of the hall took a step closer. The floor shook. "Come closer," it beckoned, voice splitting into 4 tones at once. "We want you home." "Retreat." They ran. The hallway stretched and twisted, walls flickering between concrete, static, and raw darkness. Shadows chased them, whispers clawed at their ears, every step pulling them deeper instead of closer to escape. "Finally!" Nyoka screamed, clutching her sketchbook. She ripped out a page and tore it in half. The corridor fractured like glass. For an instant, the illusion broke and they stumbled back into the real control room. The monitors were dark, the hum was gone. But the smell of ozone lingered. The warning. As they staggered into the night air, Rakuya bent over, coughing. It wasn't just a broadcast. It was a door. Saya's face was pale. A door to where? Nyoka opened her sketchbook with trembling hands. The newest drawing had already appeared. It showed the city skyline, but above it, filling the sky, the static storm writhed, tendrils of lightning reaching down into every street, every home. And across the bottom, scrawled in jagged strokes, "The signal is spreading." Episode 11, Ghost Frequency. The storm didn't break. It sat above the city like a bruise, dark clouds swirling, lightning veins flashing without thunder. No rain, no wind. Just an endless pressure in the air, like the whole world was holding its breath. The group hadn't left each other's side since the dead channel. Sleep was impossible, silence unbearable. Rakuya sat hunched over his equipment, his fingers trembling as he tuned an old shortwave radio. It hissed, cracked, whined. He jotted notes furiously. "It's not just us anymore," he muttered. "The signal's spreading across the whole city. Ghost frequencies carrying piggyback on dead stations. Even channels that don't exist are transmitting now." "Ghost frequencies?" Saya asked. "Frequencies that aren't supposed to be real," Rakuya explained. "Number stations, forgotten ranges. They're using dead air as a nest." Tsubame's voice shook. "And if people tune in?" "They don't have to." His eyes were wild. "The static finds them." Signs of spread. They didn't have to look far to see it. On the way to the station, they passed a man on the street, standing perfectly still with his ear pressed against a payphone receiver that wasn't connected to anything. His eyes rolled white, lips moving in silent whispers. Two kids sat cross-legged on the sidewalk, staring into a broken television propped against a trash can, laughing at nothing. A woman in the park held her arms open to the sky, as if embracing something only she could see. "Don't stop!" Saya hissed, pulling Nyoka away. But Nyoka's sketchbook itched in her hands, begging to capture what she saw. When she glanced down, the page was already filled with images of the strangers' faces, but their eyes were empty, and their mouths hung open wider than possible. The test. That night, Rakuya brought them to his workshop. The walls were covered in maps, marked with pins and circles. He had been charting where the signals were strongest, where people were most affected. "We can trace it," he said. "Follow the ghost frequencies to their source. If we find the anchor, maybe we can cut it." "And if it's inside us?" Tsubame whispered. No one answered. Still, they tried. Rakuya tuned his shortwave to a frequency no chart said should exist, 731.6. The static poured out, sharp and electric. Beneath it, a voice spoke. "Rakuya." He froze. "Stop fighting." The others leaned in. "You'll only make it worse." Akihiro snatched the radio and hurled it against the wall. The voice cut out, but the air in the room still hummed, vibrating against their skulls. Infected. That night, they argued. "We can't keep chasing signals," Saya shouted. "Every time we get close, it twists us deeper." "We can't ignore it either," Akihiro shot back. His hands trembled as he clenched them into fists. "It's spreading through the city. If we don't stop it, everyone ends up like those people outside." Tsubame covered her ears. "Stop! Both of you, stop!" The argument dissolved into silence. That was when Nyoka noticed her sketchbook again. A new drawing. The four of them, mouths open, static pouring out like smoke. Her throat went dry. "We're already infected." The others looked at her, faces pale. Rakuya shook his head violently. No, that's what it wants us to think. It's a bluff. But deep down they all felt it. The faint buzz in their veins, the way their reflections lingered a moment too long, the whispers echoing even when no radios were near. The broadcast in the sky. 2 nights later the storm broke, without rain. Bolts of lightning forked through the clouds, illuminating the skyline, and with every flash the city's windows lit with static. Apartments, skyscrapers, storefronts, all their screens flickered white at once. Radios blared from abandoned cars, phones buzzed, even when turned off. The entity had taken the sky as its transmitter. On every surface the same words appeared, scrolling in jagged black letters. "Tune in, let us in, be free." The city screamed. People poured into the streets, some running, some laughing, some staring at the sky with outstretched arms. The friends huddled together at the edge of it all, hearts pounding. "We can't hide anymore," Akihiro whispered. Rikuya's eyes burned with grim resolve. "Then we stop it at the source." Nyoka's sketchbook fluttered open in the wind. The newest drawing showed a massive broadcasting tower, its antenna crowned by lightning. And at its base, them. Episode 12. Tower of Echoes. The city had become a wound. The storm still churned overhead, black and swollen, its lightning veins tracing maps of veins across the sky. Static buzzed in the air like a living fog, windows flickered with white noise. Billboards screamed silent messages in jagged glyphs no one could read but everyone understood. "Tune in, let us in, be free." Everywhere they turned, people were breaking. Some stood motionless in the streets, their faces blank, whispering in rhythms that matched the static. Others laughed and wept and screamed at once, their voices tangled like overlapping broadcasts. Whole neighborhoods had gone quiet, while in others, radios and televisions shrieked without end. The friends moved through it like ghosts themselves. Splintering. They hadn't slept in days. Every step toward the tower felt heavier, like the static itself was pressing them down. Rikuya muttered equations under his breath, clutching his notebooks until his knuckles bled. "It's not just signal strength," he whispered. "It's a feedback loop. The more people it reaches, the stronger it grows. The stronger it grows, the more it reaches." "Stop talking like it's a machine," Saya snapped. Her eyes were bloodshot, her voice ragged. "It's not numbers, it's a thing, it's in us. Don't you feel it?" Akihiro turned on her, his hands shaking. "Don't start that again." But he knew she was right. He felt it every time his pulse skipped in his chest, every time the voices in the static whispered his name. He felt it when his reflection smiled before he did. Tsubemi clutched her headphones like a rosary. Her lips moved silently, mouthing words that weren't hers. She hadn't spoken in hours. And Nyoka's sketches were no longer her own. When she flipped through her book, she saw things she hadn't drawn. Strangers with hollow faces, towers sprouting like trees, black rivers running beneath the city. The last page showed 5 silhouettes climbing a staircase made of static. At the top, a door of blinding light. She closed the book and whispered, "We're already walking it." The streets. The closer they drew to the broadcasting tower, the stranger the streets became. They passed a bus stalled in the middle of an intersection, its passengers still strapped in their seats. Their eyes glowed faintly, mouths open in perfect O's. The driver's hands still gripped the wheel, skin pale as wax. An entire block was filled with televisions dragged from apartments and stores, stacked into pyramids. They all blared the same wordless signal, a steady hum, layered with breaths and faint sobbing. On the rooftops, people gathered like flocks of birds. They tilted their heads toward the tower, swaying in unison, as if waiting for some command to leap. At one corner, a man slammed his head rhythmically into a lamppost, blood smearing the metal. Each strike synced with the static pulses overhead. Saya pulled Nyoka's face away. "Don't look." But Nyoka already had. Her sketchbook hand moved without her permission. Confessions in the dark. That night, they hid in an abandoned subway tunnel. For a moment, the static was quieter there, muted by concrete and depth. They sat in a circle, too tired to move, too wired to sleep. Akihiro broke the silence. Do you think, if we stop it, we'll ever be normal again? No one answered. He laughed, bitter and sharp. Yeah, didn't think so. Saya stared at the ground. Normal's gone. Maybe it always was. She dug her nails into her palms until they drew blood. But if it's inside us, what's the point of fighting? Tsubame finally spoke, her voice so soft it was almost lost in the dark. Because if we don't, the whole city becomes us. The words hung there like smoke. Nyoka turned a page in her book. She had drawn them sitting in the tunnel exactly as they were now, but behind them, a shadow stretched taller, broader, as if something else had joined their circle. She shut the book fast. The tower. By dawn they could see it. The broadcasting tower loomed above the city, stabbing into the storm. Its antenna pulsed with lightning that never touched the ground, feeding instead into its steel frame. The closer they came, the louder the hum in their skulls. Their teeth rattled, their vision blurred. People ringed the tower like worshippers at a shrine. Some kneeled, hands clasped in prayer. Others pressed their faces to the steel fence, whispering into it like a confessional. Children played in the static, drawing shapes in the air only they could see. The friends crept through the crowd, unseen, or maybe simply ignored. The gate to the tower grounds stood open. No one guarded it. No one needed to. They stepped inside. Climbing. Inside, the hum became a roar. The stairwell spiraled upward into endless shadow, each step vibrating under their feet. The air tasted of ozone and copper. As they climbed, the walls changed. At first, rusted steel and concrete. Then patches of black mold. Then shapes etched into the metal, faces screaming, mouths wide, eyes blank. Don't look, Rikuya muttered. His own eyes darted anyway. It's just bleed through. Just interference. But the shapes twisted as they passed, mouths opening wider. Halfway up, Tsubame stumbled. Her headphones slipped, and she screamed. Not in her voice, but in dozens at once. The sound shook the stairwell. Akihiro grabbed her, held her tight until the echo died. She gasped for breath, her eyes rolling back, then whispered, "They're waiting at the top." The group went silent. Still, they climbed. The door. At last, they reached it. A steel door marked with warning signs. Radiation, high voltage, keep out. But the paint had been stripped away by static burns, the warnings charred and unreadable. Beyond it pulsed a light. Cold, white, blinding. Nyoka's sketchbook fell open on its own. The last page was finished now. The 5 of them standing before the door, hands outstretched, shadows stretching behind them into shapes that were not their own. Her hand shook as she whispered, "This is where it ends." No one argued. Rikuya reached for the handle. His skin sizzled where it touched the metal, but he didn't let go. He looked back at them, eyes hollow but burning. Once we open it, there's no turning back. Akihiro's jaw clenched. Saya's fists trembled. Tsubame's lips moved in silent prayer. Nyoka's tears smudged the sketchbook page. The door hummed with static. The storm outside howled. And with a scream of tearing metal, the door began to open. Episode 13, the last broadcast. The door shrieked as it opened, its rusted hinges screaming like tortured metal. Light poured through the crack, not warm, not golden, but sterile white, pulsing in time with the static hum. It didn't illuminate the stairwell, it erased it. Shadows vanished, outlines blurred. For one long moment, none of them were sure if they were still standing on stairs or floating in the flicker between channels. The storm outside roared louder, as if the sky itself were being pulled toward this single point. Akihiro stepped through first. He didn't hesitate. The core, the tower's broadcasting room, was gone. In its place stretched a cavern of impossible architecture. Steel beams bent and twisted into rib cages. Screens, hundreds, maybe thousands, hovered in midair, flickering images of faces that screamed, laughed, wept, all in endless loops. Antennas spiraled like bone spines pulsing with light. And at the center, floating above the floor, was the source. A sphere of static, alive and seething. Within it, faces flickered and dissolved, thousands at once. Eyes that opened in unison, mouths that whispered without sound, hands that pressed against the surface as though begging to be freed, or begging to be let in. The hum was deafening. It rattled their bones. Saya clutched her ears. It's all of them. Every voice, every ghost, every signal. Rakuya's notebook slipped from his hands. Pages tore free, sucked into the air, catching fire before they touched the ground. He stared up, tears streaking down his face. No, it's more than that. It's everything we've ever broadcast, everything humanity ever sent into the void. Every word, every prayer, every scream. Subaim collapsed to her knees. Her headphones cracked, useless. She pressed her hands over her mouth as if to hold in the voices clawing their way up her throat. Nyoka's sketchbook trembled in her grip. She opened it and found blank pages. The drawings had vanished. The book was waiting for the ending. The whisper. The sphere pulsed. A ripple tore through the air and then it spoke, not in sound but directly inside them. We are returned. The words weren't words. They were vibrations in blood, in marrow, in thought. You called, you sent, we heard, we answered. Faces swam in the static. Soldiers from old wars, children crying into lost radios, astronauts drifting in silence, and beneath them, things not human. Faces that stretched too wide, eyes that split and multiplied, mouths that curled in impossible shapes. Akihiro staggered forward, fists clenched. We didn't call you, he shouted, his voice cracked against the roar. We didn't ask for this. The static laughed, a sound like every channel blaring at once. You called with every word, every signal, every prayer to the void. We were hungry. We answered. Fractures. The friends broke. Saya's body jerked as if pulled by invisible strings. Her mouth opened and dozens of voices poured out, her own lost beneath them. She staggered toward the sphere, eyes glowing white. Akihiro grabbed her, shaking her shoulders. Stay with me, Saya! Her face twisted. For a heartbeat, her eyes cleared, and she whispered, It feels so good. Just to let go. Then the static surged, dragging her forward. Tsubame screamed, not just her own voice, but the broadcast of thousands. The sound shook the steel beams until sparks rained down. Blood dripped from her nose, her ears, her eyes. Rakuya fell to his knees, clutching his skull. It makes sense now, he babbled. It was always going to happen. A signal can't be sent without an answer. We should never have expected silence. Nyoka flipped page after page, frantic, desperate for the sketchbook to show her what to do. The last page filled itself. 4 silhouettes crumbling into static, one left standing. Her tears smeared the ink. Sacrifice. Akihiro looked at the others, his friends, his only anchor through all of this, and knew. He turned to the sphere, every muscle shaking. You want voices? You want vessels? Take me. The static rippled, considering. You are already ours. It surged forward, tendrils of white noise lashing out. Nyoka screamed, lunging toward him, but Akihiro shoved her back. Go! His voice cracked with both rage and grief. Go while you still can. The static struck him, wrapping around his body, tearing his outline into flickers. His scream echoed in the air, layered, multiplied until he was part of the roar. His face appeared across a dozen screens, frozen in agony, then dissolved into the endless broadcast. The sphere pulsed brighter, stronger, and the stairwell door slammed shut behind them. The final choice. The tower shook. Lightning split the sky, feeding into the antennas, into the core. The storm was being dragged downward, funneled into the sphere. Rakuya's mind snapped back from his trance. He staggered to his feet, eyes wild. If we overload it, if we make it collapse under its own signal, it could burn itself out. How? Saya gasped, her voice still layered with whispers. Feedback, he said, clutching at sparking wires, monitors, anything. We turn the signal back on itself, make it eat its own broadcast. But the price was clear. Someone had to stay. Someone had to hold it long enough to complete the loop. Nyoka's sketchbook filled itself again. A single silhouette remained, holding the sphere as it imploded. She recognized the shape. It was hers. Her hands trembled. Tsubame grabbed her wrist. No, not you. Nyoka looked at her, tears streaming. It's already written. Collapse. They moved fast. Rakuya tore into the machinery, hands blistered, skin seared by sparks. Saya screamed and channeled the voices inside her, forcing them into the cables, into the core. Tsubame clutched the wires and let her own voice out. Every scream, every sob, every song she'd ever sung, feeding it into the loop. Nyoka stood at the center, sketchbook in hand, as the sphere shuddered and cracked. The faces inside it wailed. Some reached toward her in desperation, others snarled with rage. The air smelled of burning ozone and blood. Come on, she whispered, voice steady now. Choke on us. The feedback caught. The roar became a shriek, then a howl. The sphere imploded, dragging light and storm and screams inward. The tower shook itself apart. Steel screamed, screens shattered, antennas snapped. And in the center, Nyoka's silhouette dissolved into static. Silence. Then, silence. The storm broke. The clouds tore open, revealing a pale dawn sky. The static vanished from the air. Radios clicked off. Screens went dark. The tower was gone. Only a twisted crater remained. Rakuya lay in the rubble, coughing blood. Saya curled beside him, eyes hollow but alive. Tsubame crawled to their side, her headphones shattered, her voice gone. But Nyoka was gone. Akihiro was gone. Only their echoes lingered. Epilogue. Weeks later, the city struggled to rebuild. People avoided radios, televisions, even their phones. The silence felt sacred, fragile. Rakuya, bandaged and broken, kept his notebooks closed. He never spoke of the math again. Saya barely spoke at all. Her eyes were always fixed on empty space, listening for whispers. Tsubame carried Nyoka's sketchbook everywhere. Its last page remained blank, waiting for a final drawing. Sometimes when the wind caught just right, they swore they heard static in the air. Soft, faint, like a sigh. Not gone. Not forgotten. Only waiting.
Thanks for listening. Stay cozy, and I'll see you in the next story.